use a 19mm socket, remove the wheel, take the lug nuts off. Take the wheel off. Now I'm going to take these caliper bolts out. I'm going to use a 14mm socket. Loosen the top one, and then loosen the bottom one. I'll pull these caliper bolts out. These actually have the slides in them. You want to keep in mind the one with the rubber on it goes on the top on this side. Just take a straight blade screwdriver. Just want to pry in between the rotor and the caliper just to compress the piston just slightly, just so it's easier to remove. Take a caliper hanger and attach this to the coil spring. Make sure there's no tension on the caliper hose. Take the brake pads off. Now I want to take off this caliper bracket. I'm going to use an 18mm socket. Take those bolts out and slide the caliper bracket off. Now I'm going to take the rotor off. Now this rotor is already loose, but if it wasn't loose, you could take a hammer, just hit in these locations right here. Just be careful of the studs. Do not hit the studs. Slide it off. I'm going to use a little rust penetrant right here before I take that nut off, and then also soak these 4 bolts down in the back that hold the hub to the knuckle. Now I'm going to take a pry bar. Just going to put it in between the lugs, the lug studs, and then take a 1 1¼ socket, and I'll take this hub nut off, loosen it up. Take that nut off. Now there's 4 bolts on the back of the knuckle that screw into the hub. I'm going to take those out with a 15mm socket. Bolts out. Now I'm going to take a hammer and tap the hub from the back side to separate it from the knuckle. You could also use a slide hammer. There we go. There is a spacer right here. You can take that off if that's in your way. I'm just going to clean this off with a wire brush. Get some of the rust out. So I'm going to use some anti-seize on this area where the hub is going to sit, so that if the hub ever has to be removed again, then it's easier to come out. And I'm going to use some of the anti-seize on this spacer. Then it's going to stick to the axle, and then I don't have to worry about it. Just slide it on there. It should stick. So we'll take the new hub. Some of these holes are closer together. The bottom ones are closer together than the top, so keep that in mind when you're installing this. Slide this in position. And install the bolts from the back side. You can push on the axle to get a little more clearance. Now I'm going to torque these bolts to 35 foot-pounds. I'm going to install the center nut, or the hub nut. Now I'm going to take a pry bar to prevent the hub from spinning. And I'm going to torque this center nut to 118 foot-pounds. Put a little anti-seize on the hub. Now To make it easier to install the brake caliper bracket, I'm just going to take a lug nut, install a lug nut just to hold the rotor. Install the brake caliper bracket, just slide it over the rotor, take the bolts, and line them up. Now we're going to torque these to 80 foot-pounds. Now install the brake pads. I want to clean these brake caliper pins up, or caliper slide pins. Just use some brake parts cleaner and a rag. Take a little brake caliper grease and grease them up. Take off the brake caliper. Use a brake caliper compressing tool. We're going to push the piston in. You just want to push the caliper in slowly, the piston in slowly. It's going to push the fluid through the brake hoses, through the brake lines, to the master cylinder, and into the reservoir. Make sure the dust boot looks okay. You can wipe off some of the excess grease if there's anything on there. And take the caliper, make sure the hose is not twisted, and slide it over the brake pads. Take the slide pin that has the rubber, put that one on top, and the other one's going to go on the bottom. Torque these bolts to 32 foot-pounds. Take this lug nut off and install the wheel. I'm going to torque these lug nuts to 100 foot-pounds, and I'm going to do it in a star pattern so that it tightens the wheel down evenly. And I'll just go around again and just double check. Now we want to pump the brake pedal. There's going to be a little bit of an air gap between the brake caliper piston and the brake pad, so we want to eliminate that air gap. Then under the hood, check the brake fluid level. Make sure the brake fluid is up to the max line and adjust accordingly.